Hi, it's Gita, and this is Practical Civics. There are some huge issues that are going to be considered by the Supreme Court in the coming months, with decisions on some of these big issues coming as early as next week. So in this three-part series, we're going to take a look at different methods or philosophies for interpreting the United States Constitution. The two dominant approaches that stand in direct contrast to each other are originalism and the evolving Constitution, sometimes called living constitutionalism. Originalism asserts that the Constitution should be interpreted according to its original meaning at the time it was ratified, and this meaning is considered fixed and binding. The modern form of originalism seeks to make decisions based on the original public meaning of the Constitution. So they interpret the Constitution based on how the words would have been understood by a reasonable, well-informed person at the time the Constitution was ratified. The goal of this is to limit judicial discretion and apply the law as it was originally understood, rather than by imposing their own contemporary values or policy preferences. And originalists believe that this practice promotes stability, predictability, and democratic legitimacy. Critics of this approach argue that it's impossible to know exactly what was meant when the Constitution was written. People also argue that this approach is inflexible, making it difficult for the Constitution to be applied to address modern problems and evolving societal norms that couldn't have been contemplated when the Constitution was written. Finally, people argue that there are moral implications of this, and that there were things that were morally acceptable in the past that are not morally acceptable today. The evolving view of the Constitution holds that it was a dynamic document whose meaning can evolve over time and adapt to changing societal needs, values, and circumstances. Proponents of this approach argue that the Constitution should be interpreted to consider contemporary values, modern understandings of justice, equality, liberty, and other principles. Also, that decisions should take into account societal progress, and that practical consequences need to be considered when interpreting the Constitution. Proponents of the evolving viewpoint argue that this is necessary for the Constitution to remain relevant and for it to effectively be able to address contemporary issues. Critics of this approach argue that it will lead to judicial activism, giving too much power to judges and allowing them to impose their own policy preferences under the guise of constitutional interpretation. They also argue that it leads to unpredictability, as interpretations can shift with changing societal and political winds. And finally, some argue that focusing on evolving values can lead to disregard for the original text and intent of the Constitution.